Okay, so I wanted to talk today about how Beau of the Fifth Column, Justin King, does anti-Iran propaganda. Now he kind of peppers this throughout the videos. It's not in everything. I haven't been through all of the videos he's done on this subject since the Gaza bombing started. So this is not exhaustive, but I've got 6 videos here to show you bits from, and it gives you a pretty good idea of what he's up to with this. Okay, so
any ground offensive. Okay, so that's good. Now let's go to the bad. There has been fighting now, obviously, in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in the bank. So far, it's relatively low level compared to what it could be. But these are...
So he's saying that there's fighting in all of these places, by the way. What it actually is Israel going and bombing Lebanon, going and bombing Syria and so on. That's what it is, and he's not acknowledging that. So yeah, the way he uses it is it's like it's an equal thing or something, like they're both equal partners in this fighting thing, and you know, he's not explaining really who's attacking who.
Are the types of things that could lead to the conflict widening, expanding, becoming regional. These are all the terms that are being thrown out. So that's not good. That's bad, actually. The good news to go along with that is that so far, and this could change at any moment, and when I say that, I mean literally while I'm filming this, it could change. So far, Iran has upped its posture, but it doesn't look like they've initiated any military response. That's good as far as keeping the conflict from expanding.
So I'll be honest, don't know what he means by Iran upping its posture. They probably just said, yeah, it's really terrible this, isn't it? Or something, you know. And the likelihood of them getting involved militarily just seems quite small right now. They've historically not really got involved with Palestine particularly.
We've talked about it throughout. The big determination here is not really going to be what happens. It's going to be how Iran perceives it. I am still of the opinion that they are waiting to see how intensive any potential ground offensive is going to be. And that's going to be what shapes their response. So that's where we're...
Yeah, so he's basically kind of starting to drop in this idea that this is between, like, Iran. Now, this is on the 23rd of October, so it's about 2 weeks in, I guess, to the bombings in Gaza. Yeah, he kind of... I just find it quite funny how he's saying that when Iran's not really taking that much of a part in it. And got this bit here.
Iran's perception, and I really feel like that's going to be the deciding factor in everything, because I feel like that's going to be what shapes Iran's perception. And right now, Iran is the controlling factor in whether or not it expands. At least it is the most likely controlling factor.
Now, I've got to say, that's kind of rubbish. Like, obviously we can say in hindsight now, well, the Yemenis are the ones who are really expanding, not Iran. Iran aren't really getting involved that much, aside from, you know, talking, basically, and that's always been the case. Iran has never been particularly concerned with Palestine or the plight of the Palestinian people, really. It doesn't like Israel, but that's not necessarily going to translate into being that bothered about Palestinians. Anyway, let's go to this one, which is... So this one I thought was quite an interesting, because it literally, he just mentions them once in here, but it's quite interesting how he does mention them.
It's working parallel tracks at the same time, hoping one works out so the other one doesn't have to be used. And again, realistically, I know everybody in the world looks at the U.S. and, well, they call the shots. Not here. Not here. The opinions that matter are in Tel Aviv and Tehran. That's where the critical decisions about this are going to be made.
And again, it's like, this is so ridiculous. Tehran is obviously the capital of Iran, but like, they're not a critical factor at all. I just, quite interestingly, I saw this interview with Norman Finkelstein recently, and he said that Iran had no clue about what Hamas was planning on October the 7th before they did it. Like, they just had no idea, and Hamas had been planning that for 2 years. So if they were really that much in control of this situation, if they were really that much in control of Hamas, if they were really that much behind Hamas, they would have known, all right? That would, something that they've been like that they've been organising for 2 years, Iran would have known about it. This is rubbish that he's talking, and it's quite funny how he does keep trying to say that the aid and the weapons and everything that Israel gives them is, I mean, that the US gives to Israel is not in any way leverage. It doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. He knows that's rubbish. It's so ridiculous. I mean, yes, they might have quite a lot, but they are actually running out. So, like, their Iron Dome capacity is kind of running out. They need weapons to keep taking out the missiles that go through, and that's having problems and stuff like that. So they can run out of stuff. It's very disingenuous for him to try and say that, but he does keep doing that. Okay, so now this one. My mouse is not...
As far as expansion, if Israel is going to launch a full-on ground offensive, basically the Middle East is in Tehran's hands. They're going to make the decision.
And again, this is so ridiculous, but this is what he keeps saying. I have not heard him mention Yemen once in this, and Yemen did actually say fairly early on, I don't know if they'd said, like, this is October the 28th, I think they had said by October the 28th that they were going to do stuff. Like, they had declared that they were going to come to the aid of their Palestinian brothers, you know. Pretty sure they'd already done it by that time. It's not like they weren't on the radar or anything, or they should have been up for him. But it's like this constant, like, framing of this as being, like, between Iran and Israel. Iran, this great power that Israel has to fight against. Oh, it's...
This has the potential to spread. There are still countries working, trying to defuse the situation, but don't know how effective they are going to be. There are indications that China is going to kind of step in and try to keep Iran from raising the temperature even more.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, this whole thing. Like, I'm not convinced that China has, I don't know, that much sway with Iran. It might do, but I don't think it matters anything like as much as he's saying. And it certainly doesn't matter because Iran's not really looking to get that much involved. They are not the controlling factor, it has to be said. Let's just look at this one. I think I have this in my notes for some reason.
About it looking like Fallujah. This entire time when we've been talking.
Yeah, I mean, he just keeps talking up like how bad it would be. Right, now let's look at this one, shall we? And this one's November the 5th.
Other non-state actors getting involved. And that's bad, but that's on the opposite end from the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario begins with Arab states, with other Middle Eastern countries, with other countries in the region getting directly involved with their actual military. That's your worst case scenario, because from there it is very easy for dominoes to start falling. If other countries in the region decided to intervene on the Palestinians' behalf, they would do so by going after Israel. There would be attacks on Israeli territory. If that coalition of countries or a singular country started to make gains into Israeli territory, that's when it could go from something that is horrible to something that is unthinkable.
Okay, so he's again talking about other Arab states, but he's going to be talking primarily about Iran, because whenever he talks about Saudi Arabia, it's always like they're trying to calm down Iran and stuff like that. He's could maybe be talking about Lebanon, which he keeps attacking, and Hezbollah haven't been that big yet. That I think there's been a few incursions like on the border with Lebanon, but yeah, I just find it quite interesting that he keeps talking about this, but he never mentions Yemen. Now, at this stage, on the 6th of December, Yemen have hijacked about 4 or 5 ships that have belonged to Israel to stop them going down the Red Sea to the Suez Canal, because they actually live on there. Yemen is actually kind of on that corner, and then Saudi Arabia is in from them along the Red Sea, and then Israel is north of them. So yeah, I mean, he might try and say that they're not a state actor. There have been, like, I've seen on community notes on Twitter, them saying Houthis are just the rebels, the Houthis are just the rebels, they're not really the state actors. But the Houthis, the people who represent the people of Yemen who Saudi Arabia are trying to crush, basically, and they've been trying to put their own proxy government in. So yeah, the proxy government of Saudi Arabia isn't going to, but personally, you know, I would say that you kind of need to take the Houthis seriously, even if you're not prepared to acknowledge that they're a state actor. Anyway, so this is next bit.
Into one that's really bad. Like, just unthinkable, where you are not counting the lost in thousands. This is what the Biden administration foreign policy, their diplomacy efforts have been focused on. That was the priority, not what everybody was looking at.
So it's quite funny, because this is a little bit of a thing where he's trying to say that he's been... The only reason he's not been trying to talk down Israel or say anything to Israel is because he's been focused on calming Iran down and stop Iran getting involved. Kind of ridiculous.
Now that the signaling has occurred, you'll see a shift, and it's already started. State Department is meeting with Arab foreign ministers, I think, today, and they're talking about a ceasefire. A word that realistically the U.S. government probably isn't going to use for a while. You'll hear pause, as Biden said, a pause. The signaling from Iran started right about the time he said that. That's when the shift occurred. And
so he's basically trying to say that this is all about like diplomatic stuff and, you know, vague things that, you know, Iran might be saying, and no, we're definitely not going to get into a big conflict. And like, they weren't going to anyway. It just wasn't going to happen.
Until then, up until those signals were clear from Iran, the worst.
It's a really irritating thing. I'm going to. I don't know why it does this glitch thing. It's very annoying.
Front, left.
Scenario was something that had to be considered, because it's not something that was out of the realm of possibility. It was unlikely, but if a coalition of countries or a country in the region decided to intervene on the Palestinians' behalf and started hitting Israeli territory, the second that happened, you were far more likely to have strategic arms deployed there than at any point in the conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah, so it's quite funny how, he is basically trying to say that it's all between Iran and that, here we go.
Widening, it getting really bad, talking about...
Yeah, so he was explaining in the first half that he was like being very careful not to say what might be happening with Iran.
Regional conflict in the Middle East. And I have been vague about it. Now, as far as the message goes, I do not believe that the threat has subsided, as in it's completely gone. It is definitely lessened. Over the last few days, there has been a lot of signaling coming from the Iranian government. Well, elements within the Iranian government, because the Iranian government is basically three governments wrapped up in a trench coat. They're not always united, but there's been a lot of signaling, and that signaling is that they don't want a regional conflict either. They called for a boycott, which is another way of saying we don't actually want to fight. Okay? That's really good news. It is better news than most people probably really grasp. So that expansion, the possibility of a regional conflict, is what the Biden administration's foreign policy has been prioritizing. Stopping that. That's been their main goal. Because of that signaling, and it is worth noting, because in the U.S. the coverage says Iran proxies. Okay? Iran has influence over the non-state actors. They don't have command. So there's still a risk there.
So I think the kind of thing that he's going to be referring to there is Hezbollah, which are a militant kind of group in Lebanon. So, and they're often said to be funded by Iran. Now, I'm sure Iran helped them out a bit, but they are their own group, and they are for Lebanon. They're not for Iran. And then there's going to be various groups in Syria that might be regarded as, Iranian proxies, kind of thing, because all that is still kind of a big mess in Syria.
But the worst case scenario here is now very, very, very unlikely. it wasn't necessarily just a couple of weeks ago. So starting off, an expansion of this conflict could include other non-state actors getting involved. And that's bad, but that's on the opposite end from the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario...
Yeah, so, it's just really funny how he's been kind of dropping this around. So somebody had written this letter to him saying, hey, you've been hinting at stuff, but could you be more specific about it now? But, yeah. Yeah.
That's, I didn't see the value in talking about that until we knew, because I was very hopeful that cooler heads would prevail in Tehran. I know in the U.S. There's a lot of propaganda about the country, but they're not ignorant people. And I thought that was a very... I thought them recognizing the stakes was the most likely. But it just wasn't something I was ready to talk about. I didn't see the value in scaring people for no reason. Because if it did start going down that direction, there's nothing anybody could do about it. But it does appear that Iran and other major players in the area have signaled that isn't what they want, which stands to reason if you go watch the video over on the other channel with the whiteboard in our fictitious region.
Yeah, so it's just it's quite funny. He kind of how does he get to be so well informed on this? Where's he getting this from? Is what I often wonder when I look at this, because that's a lot. I mean, I don't actually think this is all genuine stuff that he's saying. I think he's putting forward propaganda, basically. I think he's telling you what the US government want you to be told or want you to believe. That's what I think he's doing. But I do think it's quite interesting that he just seems to have so much knowledge about so many things. He's not doing all of his own research, okay? He's just not. Where he's getting it from? Well, who knows, hey. Anyway, so this bit is Mideast perceptions, eh? So, this is kind of a funny one.
This leads to the obvious question. If foreign policy is about power, and Israel is becoming a liability, why doesn't the U.S. just do an about face and no longer be friends with Israel, right? It would make sense. It's long-term strategic planning for the region. That's the answer. We've been talking about it on the channel for years. The U.S. wants to deprioritize the Middle East so it can look elsewhere. Cough, Africa, cough.
I do find this idea quite amusing, that he's trying to say that they want to deprioritize the Middle East, i.e. they don't want to have to be messing around in the Middle East very much. That's what Israel exists for, okay? It exists to mess around in the Middle East and to cause trouble in the Middle East. What he means by moving the attention to Africa, I don't know. Maybe they've got lots of mines of precious metals that the US want. Who knows?
That's the plan. In order for the U.S. to deprioritize the Middle East, you have to have those poles of power. Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. For the U.S. to maintain power, even though they're not active in the region, two of those countries have to be more aligned, leaning more towards the U.S. It's not going to be Iran. even though the U.S. wants to bring Iran out, Iran is going to align more with Russia or China.
So I just find it so funny how he wants to, saying they want to bring Iran out. What he kind of like, they want to bring Iran into their kind of little fold, out of the cold maybe is what he's not saying. But it is quite funny how he's trying to say they want to get Iran not diplomatically on their side. I don't know, maybe they should just install a puppet government then if that's really what they want, but they probably wouldn't succeed because that has been tried with Iran and the current government got rid of them. That was a proxy government for the British, by the way, not America. But obviously, you know, if they're proxy for the British, then they're proxy for America as well.
So, in order to have the majority of the polls, the United States needs Saudi Arabia and Israel to be supportive to some degree, to lean more their way. Again, we're not talking about friends. Countries don't have friends, they have interests. So they need those interests to align. That's why the U.S. can't just be like, you're not our friend anymore. Because the U.S. needs Israel for long-term planning.
Yeah, so I just find it quite funny how he's saying, oh no, we can't diss Israel in public because we need them as our friends. Like, yeah, you do. That's not what he's saying here.
At the same time, the U.S. can't risk losing the Arab world. So there's this balancing act that's occurring. The problem is U.S. diplomatic efforts they really are trying to mitigate harm right now. The problem is it is very slow moving. It's not going quickly. And the Arab world is sitting there looking at it and going, okay, great, some relief got in and you got a 4-hour pause, whoopee. The U.S. can say, hey, we're trying to do X, Y, and Z as well. But the United States doesn't exactly have a track record of being totally truthful when it comes to the Middle East, right? We can forgive the Arab publics for not just taking the U.S. at its word here. Because sometimes past performance does predict future results. So the U.S. is in a situation where...
Yeah, so it's just really quite funny how he's like justifying the fact that that Israel is basically being allowed to bomb Gaza to nothing by saying it needs to be friends with Israel for this long-term planning. And like, yeah, it does, but that's about destabilising, right? And to be quite honest, bombing Gaza is almost certainly part of it, really. So we've got this last one here, which I thought was quite interesting. So let's go from about here.
They made their pitch. They made their pitch. They were like, hey, we need to help. We need to help. They suggested arming Palestinian forces and suggested cutting ties, diplomatic ties, with Israel. There were some other suggestions that were made, but those were, and if you're not familiar with it, it's basically representatives from the Islamic world. And while they were there, Iran, they made their pitch. They made their pitch. They were like, hey, we need to help. We need to help. They suggested arming Palestinian forces and suggested cutting ties, diplomatic ties, with Israel. There were some other suggestions that were made, but those were the two big ones. That would be a pretty big escalation. The OIC basically told them to kick rocks.
Okay, so this is quite interesting. Now, this video I checked, it was, right, so this is made on the November the 13th. I decided to look up this OIC, found a website, and they've got a Twitter account, look, the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation, the the second largest intergovernmental organisation after the UN, with 57 member states. Cool that. Anyway, so this is the meeting. The Joint Arab-Islamic Extraordinary Summit was held in the city of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia today, November the 11th, 2023, to discuss the Israeli aggression against Palestinian people. The summit was opened by the Crown Prince and Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Sorry, I've not usually practiced that one. With the participation and leaders of the heads of government and heads of delegations of the member states of the Organisation of Islamic Cooperation and the League of Arab States. In his speech to the summit, Secretary General expressed his sincere thanks and gratitude to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia under the leadership and custodian of 2 holy mosques. Thanks them for the invitation to convene this extraordinary summit, for the generous hospitality, for all the arrangements, blah blah blah. The Secretary affirms that this is Arab-Islamic summit comes to confirm our solidarity with and unwavering support for the Palestinian people and our joint commitment to our responsibilities for supporting our central cause, the cause of Palestine and Al-Quds Al-Sharif. The Secretary General called for an immediate, durable and comprehensive cessation of the ongoing Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people, for opening humanitarian corridors to deliver aid and essential needs to the Gaza Strip in an adequate and sustainable manner, and for providing international protection for the Palestinian people. He underlined his absolute rejection of plans for the forced displacement of Palestinians, indicating that a just, lasting and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian cause requires the establishment of the independent state of Palestine on the borders of June 4th, 1967, with Al-Quds Al-Sharif, that means Jerusalem, as its capital, based on the international legitimacy resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. Al-Quds Al-Sharif is basically the Palestinian name for Jerusalem. So no mention of that here. Now, I did try to find a video of it. It's all in Arabic. They're speaking Arabic, obviously. The website's not particularly great, but I couldn't see any sign that there were minutes of the meeting, so I was just not entirely sure where he got this specifics about what Iran is supposed to have said and that. So here we go. I found these news reports on it. Al Jazeera, Arab Islamic Summit rejects justifying Gaza war as Israeli self-defense. So this was the 11th of November, so this was the day that tweet was posted. Okay, so yeah, summit on Saturday condemned Israeli aggression on the Gaza Strip, war crimes and barbaric and inhumane massacres by the occupation government. A final communique said. Now, said a few other things. Israelis don't really care what's happening. This summit was just for the sake of semblance of unity in the Arab and Muslim world. It's a watered down statement. Not all Arab leaders decided to attend. Blah blah blah. Opening remarks. This is humanitarian catastrophe. Blah blah blah. Turkish president said Israel was taking revenge on girls and babies. Blah blah blah. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who is considered a puppet by the people of the West Bank. That's where he's in charge. Israel's aggression. Blah blah blah. Qatar's emir questioned how long. Blah blah blah. Saudi Arabia, in response to exceptional circumstances, taking countries feel the need. Blah blah blah. OIC, Al-Fatah, President of Egypt, blah, blah, blah. Iran. Okay. With Iran repeatedly warning that the scope of war will expand if Israel does not stop its attacks, President Ebrahim Raisi, I guess, also attended the meeting in Riyadh, marking the first visit by an Iranian president in 11 years. Blind bombardment against Gaza must stop, Raisi said, adding that Islamic governments should designate the army of the occupying and aggressor regime Israel as a terrorist organisation. Raisi highlighted that Washington is supporting Israel in the United Nations and vetoes resolutions that prevent the killing of Palestinians. It has paved the way for Israel to kill more, to bombard more and to shell more. So that's apparently what Iran has said. That's what Iran has said according to Al Jazeera. Okay, let's have a look at what Reuters says. Riyadh, November 11th, Saudi Arabia and other Muslim countries called on Saturday for an immediate end to military operations in Gaza, rejecting Israel's justification of its actions against Palestinians as self-defence. Riyadh urged the criminal court to blah blah blah, Saudi Arabia blah blah blah. Dozens of leaders, including Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, Turkish President Erdogan, blah blah blah, Prince Mohammed, let's just say who was there. We are facing a humanitarian catastrophe. President Raisi hailed the Palestinian. Raisi, the Iranian president. Raisi hailed the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas for fighting against Israel and urged Islamic countries to impose oil and goods sanctions on Israel. There is no other way but to resist Israel. We kiss the hands of Hamas for its resistance against Israel, Raisi said in his address. So that's what they have said. Okay. So Riyadh has pushed back, engaged more closely with Iran to push back against US. So Riyadh is obviously Saudi Arabia. Push back against Iran to condemn Hamas. So Raisi's trip was the first by a Iranian head of state for more than a decade to Iran, and Riyadh formally ended years of hostility under a Chinese brokered deal in March. Okay, so that's what he said. That's what the Iranian president said. He didn't say arm the Palestinians, saying kiss the hand of Hamas for its resistance against Israel. It's not the same as saying we must arm the Palestinians. Now, they do mention something about sanctions, but that's not a huge deal. I can't remember, what did he say that
They made their pitch. They made their pitch. They were like, hey, we need to help. We need to help. They suggested arming Palestinian forces and suggested cutting ties, diplomatic ties, with Israel. There were some other suggestions that were made, but those were the two big ones.
Right, I've not seen any of that. No cutting diplomatic ties. No arming Palestinians. Nothing in these reports. Nothing in that tweet that said... Like, obviously, the tweet's not going to give many of the details or anything like that. But this is not what has been reported, okay? I don't know where he's got that from. Don't know why he's saying... Well, I suspect he's saying that because he wants to make Iran look bad in this situation, when Iran almost certainly has no intention of arming Israel, Palestinians, and they've not mentioned cutting diplomatic ties. They've only mentioned sanctions. That's it. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting from that point of view. So there was a couple more bits that were interesting in here.
It's even less likely that they get involved directly now than it was back then. The one country that is steadfast in its support, there's two unique things about it. One is that it's a country that, when it comes to foreign policy, it's kind of frozen in the past because it's been isolated, which is why it's important to bring Iran out. And the other thing is, it's further away. If it was to...
So it's really funny how he's saying this is the one country, the only country. This is November the 13th, right? I can't remember exactly when the hijacking started, but it was around that time maybe. They definitely had already said they were going to go and defend the Palestinians in Yemen. The Yemenis had already said that, okay? So either around that time or quite soon after, the Yemenis took the first ship. And I think it's also worth noting that Somalian farmers took one of the Israeli ships too. They did that. So it's like, this is not the case that Iran is steadfastly supporting Palestine, or the only country even. It's not either. It's not steadfastly supporting country, and it's not the only country either that's supporting Palestine. Yemen is the country that's steadfastly supporting Palestine. Absolutely just really ridiculous.
Important news here is that the Gulf states, they don't seem to want an escalation. And now they have kind of pushed off Iran, who was asking for one. That's good news. The other side to that is that Iran, while it doesn't have control of a lot of the organizations that they get called proxies in Western media, they don't have control over them, but they have a whole lot of influence. A whole lot. And if they are upset by the way they were kind of ignored, they may influence them to take a more active role. So let's all hope that the Saudis were diplomatic.
This is just hilarious because when he talks about Iranians proxies, he means Hezbollah, who, might get a bit of help from Iran, but they, like I said, they're their own group and they're for Lebanon, they're not for Iran. And he's probably also referring to groups, some military groups in Syria. And I don't know, maybe he's hoping you think of Jordan as a proxy for Iran too. He never really is very clear about that. But yeah, it's just really funny how like he does do this. I've mentioned this sort of pro-Saudi Arabia thing that he's done, and he's also been doing this kind of China is a less bad thing. Ugh. He does this, when it comes to Iran, China and Saudi Arabia are the calming factors. It's just ridiculous. That's not what's going on. It's not as though Iran are this massive belligerent power. I mean, they haven't been doing much of the way of expansionism. And let's not forget, Israel does attack Iran. It has done that. I don't know if it's done that recently. I haven't been keeping that much of an eye on it, but it does. So that's kind of it for this time about his pro-Iran stuff. I mean, anti-Iran stuff. So I suggest you keep watching out for that kind of thing. And, watch out for what he says about China and Saudi Arabia and, like, who's potentially pulling on who. It's really funny how he tries to, how it changes, really, according to, like, the context, basically. Bye.